me also explain the difference here. Lithium iron phosphate. So the newest hybrids are using actually hybrid of a lithium iron phosphate because in batteries, general, you typically have starting batteries, and then you have deep cycle or dual purpose. So different, they're constructed differently. So when you're looking for power to turn over the engine, that's a starting battery. When you're looking to discharge a continuous draw over a long period of time, and then have it come back up again, that's a deep cycle or a dual purpose battery. So, totally different types of battery, and if you put them in the wrong application, they're going to fail. So, in your hybrids, there is power. So, in the other technologies, we refer to them as either starting or dual purpose. In lithium iron phosphates, the terms they use is power or energy. Power is basically the same as the starting, and energy would be for long discharge or for the electric car application. So this is a power lithium iron phosphate. And if you were to look at in a vehicle that had a high discharge or running pure draw, this will fail because this battery becomes unstable when the battery voltage drops below a certain point. When you drop to the 7-volt range on lithium iron phosphate, the cells become unstable and they won't charge back properly off the alternator that's in the vehicle. So, what's the difference on how this can be a power or starting application versus a energy application or deep cycling application is you need to equip the lithium iron phosphate with what is called a BMS. And the BMS is a battery management system. Now, BMS basically is controlling the actual cells in here. So what that BMS is going to prevent is the batteries being discharged below that threshold of the 7 volts to prevent them from becoming unstable. And by having that installed, the BMS, you then make sure that you can cycle them properly. And matter of fact, on that race team that I was discussing, their first setup, they purchased the lithium iron phosphate cells, put them in the vehicle, and just ran raw energy like that with no BMS. So they ran 2 races like that. So basically those batteries are shot. They basically damaged about $80,000 in batteries. But that's chump change for them. It's amazing. So now they're realizing, they're learning from that, they realize the value of the BMS because they're not going to have that happen a second time. And they were getting about 110 miles, no, excuse me, they're getting about 85 miles out of their pack, just enough between each leg. And they're trying to get up to 110 to 120 miles. So they want to know how they can achieve that. So this company was boasting about safety. With racing, there's always inherent dangers. So they want something that will get them to the next level. So talking about racing, let's go back to hybrids. There's only so much energy that can be generated out of a lithium iron phosphate. The chemistry, there is nothing else more that can be done to it. There's only so much stored energy density that you can have in this chemical design. So then how on earth did Tesla make their range so much larger, so much longer runtime? Well, they tweaked the chemistry of the batteries. So when you start tweaking the chemistry, yes, you're going to start to improve the runtime, but the more you start to improve the runtime, there are trade-offs. The trade-off is the volatility of the battery. So we saw that Tesla that caught on fire, right? Right. So, I mean, it can happen. And on the Tesla, they have the entire batteries on the floor of the car. So I don't know if anyone has in your normal daily driver, but the floor on your car is a weak point in the car for penetration. I mean, it's unlikely for something to go through the bottom of your floor, but it can be done. So if the battery packs fall underneath you, you puncture one, and you have some type of a short occur, there's that possibility that could occur, and that's what we saw happen on a Tesla. I mean, it's rare, but it can happen. So, okay. So what I was going to do, the way I have this laid out, and because this is your class is really unique, I'm going to fast forward to the area that deals with what I'm here today about, dealing with the hybrids. I will cover these chemistries first, nickel metal hydrate, and I'm going to cover lithium iron phosphate. I didn't put a section in there on lithium ion. I will discuss the difference between them. And quite honestly, I don't see the need to talk about it as much because they're not going to use it in the hybrids. Lithium ion was the stepping stone to where they are now. And I will explain the difference between the two. So we'll first cover nickel metal hydrate, and then we'll go into lithium iron phosphate. After we cover those two areas, I'll go back to the beginning, and then time permitting, I'll go through that. Most important thing for you guys today is your questions. So any question pops in your head, just don't even have to raise your hand. Raise your hand, start asking your question, and if I'm mid-sentence, cut me off. I do it to people all the time. Talking to my head, I blur it out because I find as I get older, if I wait to ask my question, I forget it. So I've been to enough training classes where I personally would be in a class and I have a question and I ask it. Oh, I'm not at that section yet. Save your question till I get there. And I'll cover your question in well, I forget, he forgets, and half the questions in the class never get asked. So since I personally don't like it to be done to me, I make sure that when I get to class, if you ask me a question, it has nothing to do with what we're on, or it's going to be coming up. I want to make sure your questions do get answered, because that's the most important thing with training, getting your questions answered. So I found that once I started to do that, the classes are far more interactive and they're far more interesting, and everyone's getting the most out of it. So, get to that section. This is nice, by the way. I like this. So just to show you really quick what we're skipping over here. Battery basics, we're going to be skipping over how the initial batteries, the wet acids we see, is the wet acid battery. And then we'll talk about deep cycle batteries, dual purpose battery, different chemistries, flooded batteries, AGM batteries, how AGM has the recombination effect, gel batteries. And that's normally the class I do. So I said, okay, but this is not what you guys want to learn about. You want to learn about this, nickel metal hydrides. Especially this, your Prius pack. So, here we go. Where's that? Where do you need the bag at? No bag? Have the rest remaining? Okay, I just want to get one of them. Just want to grab one. This is something I haven't had to do in 2 years. And that's actually read along because the rest of this training class, I never even look at the screen. I can simply talk to you for 2 to 4 hours and I know it all by heart. This part I do not know by heart. So, but I do know understand all the basics with it. So, nickel metal hydride batteries. The nickel metal hydride battery, which is abbreviated with the chemical name NiMH or Ni-MH, is a typical type of rechargeable battery. The chemical reactions are somewhat similar to largely obsolete nickel cadmium cell, so NiCads. So the evolution of rechargeables, first it came out with nickel cadmiums, then you came, which was one of the first rechargeables, then the next evolution was nickel metal hydride. Those became very popular. So when they made the Prius came out, the first battery pack was a nickel metal hydride. So, okay, and they found a good use for it with the Prius. Now the nickel metal hydride design uses positive electrode of nickel oxyhydroxide, NiOOH, like the nickel cadmium, but the negative electrodes use a hydrogen absorbing alloy instead of cadmium, being in essence a particular application of nickel hydrogen battery chemistry. So the advancement was the implementation of hydrogen into the chemical reaction. So think of hydrogen, think of the hydrogen as a source of energy. You've seen hydrogen used for many years. First source it was used for was the Hindenburg. Saw what happened there. We also started about 5 years ago, they were making the hydrogen fuel cells. Honda developed a Civic that's running on hydrogen fuel cells. The military has vehicles that are being used that are running on hydrogen fuel cells as well. So hydrogen is definitely a good source for energy, and that's where we saw the next evolution with the use of nickel metal. Now nickel metal hydride using hydrogen versus the cadmium. So one of the benefits with the nickel metal hydride design, you can have 2 to 3 times the capacity of the equivalent size nickel cadmium, and the energy density approaches that of a lithium ion cell. So now a nickel metal hydride, 2 to 3 times the capacity of a nickel cadmium, and reaching, that's the real key thing, is reaching the energy density. Energy density is basically how much stored energy you have in a specific area. So the stored energy capacity of this battery is far greater than the energy capacity of this battery. That's a key. That's why this is lithium iron phosphate. That's why this is AGM, which is absorbed glass mat. This is lithium based, this is lead based. So we all know lead is heavy, right? Yeah. Okay. And there's only so much you can do to compress it. Lead has a specific energy density. While lithium has a higher energy density than that of lead. Now, nickel metal hydride having stored energy very similar to that of lithium ion. But we know what the limitations are of lithium ion, very volatile. Any questions on that? The typical specific energy for a small nickel metal hydride cell is about 100 watt-hours per kilogram. And for larger nickel metal hydride cells, about 75 watt-hours per kilogram. That's basically one of the measurements. So actually, when I was at K2, this came up. And they were asking about the specific energy of this battery. And how was that? You know, that's a really key factor. The energy density of that, because in that race car, they were going to get as much stored energy in the smallest space as possible and with the least weight as possible. If they make that vehicle too heavy, because of the battery, it's going to slow the car down, and it's actually going to decrease the efficiency of the actual energy from the batteries. You know, if you were to imagine and try to make that car with these batteries, it would sink in the sand. It simply wouldn't handle that. So imagine the tanks. You know, tanks are really big, but they're really spread out. Those things are heavy, so it's not really a need to have a light battery since they're so heavy as it is. But think of a race car, they can't have so much weight being lost to batteries. So this rating of 100 watt-hours per kilogram is significantly better than the typical 40 to 60 watt-hours of nickel cadmium. So we're seeing an improvement there, almost double. Definitely it's double range. We're seeing, 75 as a safe number. That's definitely within the range of almost double. On the high end, 60 to 100, we can just see the improvement of the energy density for nickel metal hydride to nickel cadmium. That's why when the Prius was developed, the decision was to go with nickel metal hydride.
Second generation or third?
The first generation.
Oh, still in the first generation.
Oh, in the first generation, it was nickel metal hydride. That's what they came out with. And the plug-in versions, those are the ones that we're now seeing that's with the lithium iron phosphate. Nickel metal hydride batteries typically set up with each cell as 1.2 volts. 1.2 volts per cell. You'll see on the lithium iron phosphate cells, those are set up at 3.5 volts per cell. In a 12 volt battery, kind of related to you, 12 volt battery has 6 cells in here. Each cell is 2.1 volts. So each type of battery is typically set up with a different voltage per cell. The significant disadvantage of nickel metal hydride batteries is the high rate of self-discharge. So this is something we've seen. A lot of your power tools at one time are nickel metal hydride. So what's happening though, even though they were fully charged, leave them sit for a while, they self-discharge. And that's really not good for batteries. What happens to a battery that's self-discharged and is left like that over an extended period of time? That's right, memory effect. So the worst thing you can do to any battery, I don't care if it's a wet acid, AGN, gel, nickel cadmium, nickel metal hydride, lithium iron phosphate, go and discharge it and sit it in the corner somewhere and leave it like that. That is the kiss of death to any battery, because it's going to build up so much internal resistance in it that when you then try to recharge it, it's very difficult to break through the resistance. And basically, you'll turn one of these into a lead anchor. And these are really expensive to damage like that. So the key is having a battery that when it's fully charged, that it has the characteristics of holding its charge. So think about the Priuses, even though they have a nickel metal hydride pack, well, most people are driving their Priuses on a daily basis. So that downside of the nickel metal hydride self-discharging doesn't really come too much of a factor. However, if they have them where they're sitting, like a lot of agencies do have them as a carpool vehicle or a pool vehicle, where they're sitting for an extended period of time, that battery will start to self-discharge. And if they're not properly maintaining them, that will definitely impact the use life of that battery in service. Here's a picture of the pack in the Prius that you have out there. Have you guys taken one of them apart, or do you have one?
Yes.
So talking about that class I went to in San Antonio, what we learned about was the biggest misconception that was happening as if a Prius were to fail because of the battery pack. The biggest misconception that because a cell failed, the pack was junk. It's not. So there's a big aftermarket for the battery packs. There's actually a guy who's coming to class. The company's called ACDC. Back east, he's had other companies open up, especially in California, because we have the highest use of Prius vehicles in the country here in California. Basically getting these battery packs from the junkyards, and they're opening them up, testing, looking for the bad cell, placing the bad cell, and now you have a good pack ready to go back in service. But you definitely have to know what you're doing when you're working on a Prius. We were at, I was at LA City Fire, and they were talking about what they had found out about the Prius. Very high voltage in there, and there was a Prius that was in a major car accident on the 10 freeway, and the LA City Fire responded on the freeway to that, and they used the jaws of life to take the people out. It's before they knew what they were dealing with. So one of the firemen had one of their saws, started to cut into the Prius, and hit the high voltage cable. Well, the minute he hit the high voltage cable, it shot right back at him, right into his head, killed him instantly. So,